The first few years of our marriage weren't easy. I made mistakes, plenty of them. I was immature, self-centered, and more focused on navigating my own ambitions than nurturing the partnership we were building. My wife, hurt and disillusioned, retaliated in her own way. Early in our marriage, she attempted to cheat on me, not because she didn't love me, but because she wanted me to feel the pain I had caused her. That moment marked the first fracture in our relationship, one that neither of us fully addressed. Years passed, and while we stayed together, the unresolved wounds festered. We had children, and they became our focus, but the foundation of our marriage remained fragile. Every argument, every unspoken resentment added weight to the cracks. We both coped in our own ways, often leaning into avoidance rather than confrontation. 2 years ago, everything came to a head. While I was away working in another state for the summer, she filed for divorce. I was blindsided. At the time, I thought it was a rash decision, something she did out of frustration, but looking back, I see it was the culmination of years of unresolved hurt. She felt alone, unheard, and trapped in a marriage that wasn't meeting her needs. That summer was a turning point for me in more ways than one. While grappling with the reality of our failing marriage, I made a decision I would later regret. I had a one-night stand. It was impulsive, selfish, and born out of a mix of anger and despair. But almost as soon as it happened, I realized I didn't want my marriage to end. I wanted to fight for it, for her, for our kids. When I returned home, I came clean about many of my mistakes, but I kept the affair a secret. I convinced myself that it was better this way, that she didn't need to know. I told myself it would only cause more harm. She never found out directly, but a few months later, she stumbled across a clue, a message or behavior, something I don't fully remember now, and confronted me. Elite. I doubled down on my deception, desperate to keep the fragile peace we were beginning to rebuild. For the next 2 years, guilt followed me like a shadow. I thought I could bury it, that by focusing on my family and making positive changes, I could somehow make up for my mistakes. But guilt is a weight that never truly goes away. It finds its way into the cracks of every moment, growing heavier with time. I convinced myself that we were healing. My wife and I were making progress, or so I thought. After the divorce filing scare, I made an effort to be more present, more attentive. I stopped drinking with friends as much and tried to show her that I was committed to being a better husband and father. And she, in her own way, seemed to be trying too. She focused on the kids, on school, and on building a version of herself she could be proud of. But there was always a distance between us, an invisible wall that neither of us wanted to address. I carried the burden of my secret affair, and she carried the weight of years of unspoken resentment. We didn't confront it, we coexisted in a fragile peace. That fragile peace was tested again when I joined the military last year. It was a decision I made for our family, for stability and purpose, but it meant leaving them behind. Since April, I had only been home for about a month in total if you added up all the days. I thought I could manage the distance, that the occasional phone calls and messages would keep us connected. But being away from home didn't just test our marriage. It exposed the cracks we'd been trying to ignore. The new routine. While I was away, my wife began to thrive in ways I hadn't expected. She started going to the gym regularly, focusing on her health and building confidence. She juggled school, motherhood, and everything else with an energy I hadn't seen in years. She was becoming someone new, stronger, more independent. First, I was proud of her. Seeing her grow gave me hope that we could build a stronger marriage when I returned. But as her confidence grew, so did her social life. She made a new friend at the gym, a woman she instantly connected with. They became inseparable, spending hours talking after workouts, going out together, and sharing their lives in a way that made me feel like an outsider. She spoke of this friend as someone she knew she'd have for life, someone who truly understood her. I told myself it was harmless, that she deserved to have close friendships. But something about the intensity of their bond gnawed at me. One day, she mentioned going out drinking with this friend and her husband. This was unusual, my wife never drank. It had always been a point of contention between us, especially after I left the Mormon church. She had nearly divorced me over my drinking habits in the past, so hearing that she had not only gone out but gotten drunk surprised me. When I confronted her about it, she brushed it off, saying she wanted to experience something different, to let loose. I wanted to be upset about the hypocrisy, but I bit my tongue. If this was her way of loosening the tight grip of her upbringing, maybe it was progress. Then she mentioned something that made my stomach turn. While they were out, the husband of her gym friend had touched her leg. She told me she immediately confronted him, making it clear that it wasn't okay. I believed her, but it left me uneasy. I told her she shouldn't drink around them again, not because I didn't trust her, but because I didn't trust him. She agreed, but it planted a seed of doubt in my mind that I couldn't shake. Christmas break. When I returned home for Christmas break, I was determined to focus on our family. I wanted to show her that I was all in, that I was committed to making our marriage work. She suggested we go to her gym friend's house to drink and have fun. Against my better judgment, I agreed, thinking it would give me a chance to meet the people who had become such a big part of her life. That night we drank together, laughed, and for a moment, it felt like we were a normal couple again. I drank too much and passed out on their couch. When she woke me up to go home, everything seemed fine, but looking back, I wonder what I missed while I was asleep. A week later, we hosted them at our house. Once again, I drank too much and went to bed early. That night, I sent a few Snapchats to friends, harmless snaps of the moonshine I was drinking. The next morning, I thought nothing of it, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. The first confrontation. On the drive to my parents' house before I left for training, she brought it up. "Who did you send those snaps to?" she asked, her tone cold. I was caught off guard. "Just friends," I said honestly. "Nothing inappropriate." She wasn't satisfied. She pressed for details, making it clear that sending snaps to women, regardless of the context, wasn't okay. I explained myself as best as I could, but the tension lingered. Then, almost as if she couldn't hold it in any longer, she asked the question I had been dreading for years. "Did you ever cheat on me?" The guilt hit me like a freight train. For years, I had convinced myself that I could keep this secret buried, that it would only hurt her if she knew. But as I looked into her eyes, I knew I couldn't lie anymore. I told her the truth. Her reaction was devastating. She cried, yelled, and withdrew all in the span of a few hours. I had destroyed whatever trust we had rebuilt, and I knew it. Leaving for training the next day felt like running away from the consequences of my actions, but I didn't have a choice. I could only hope she would find it in her heart to let me try to fix what I had broken. The confession tore through our marriage like a storm. As I sat in the passenger seat on the way to my parents' house, I watched her wipe tears from her face, her knuckles white as they gripped the steering wheel. The weight of my betrayal had shattered the fragile peace we'd built. I knew she felt blindsided, and the worst part was knowing I couldn't do anything to make it easier. Not while I was about to leave her again for training. For the next few days, our communication was sparse. I didn't expect forgiveness, and I certainly didn't deserve it. But the silence felt unbearable. Every moment apart amplified the guilt I carried, the knowledge that I had hurt her in a way I couldn't take back. When she did message me, it was often brief and cold. But then, late at night, when she'd been drinking, her tone would change. "I miss you," she'd write. "I love you." Those moments gave me hope, but they were fleeting. By morning, the walls were back up, her vulnerability replaced with distance. I threw myself into training, but my focus was fractured. Every call, every text from her brought with it a mix of relief and dread. Was she okay? Was she spiraling? Would she ever be able to forgive me? My mind cycled through these questions endlessly, leaving me exhausted and distracted. Then one evening, she dropped a bombshell. The violation. She texted me, saying she'd had a bad day, that her emotions were all over the place. I asked her about it the next day, worried but unsure how to approach the conversation. That's when she told me something that made my blood run cold. She admitted that, 2 weeks earlier, her gym friend's husband had violated her boundaries again. The first time he'd touched her leg, but this time he had gone further. While I had been passed out on their couch during our first visit, he had groped her. She described feeling shocked and violated, unsure how to react in the moment. She hadn't told me then because she didn't want to ruin my time home, and it took her weeks to work up the courage to tell her gym friend. Her friend's response wasn't what she had hoped for. Instead of supporting her, the friend became defensive, accusing my wife of lying and asking why she had waited so long to speak up. Their relationship quickly began to unravel, leaving my wife feeling isolated and betrayed. As she told me this, I felt a mix of anger, guilt, and helplessness. Anger at the man who had crossed a line, guilt that I hadn't been there to protect her, and helplessness because I was hundreds of miles away and couldn't do anything to fix it. I want to confront him, I told her. He needs to know this isn't okay. She hesitated, her voice trembling. If you do that, it's just going to make things worse with her. She's already mad at me. I felt trapped. How could I let this go unaddressed? How could I stand by while she suffered? She eventually agreed that I could send him a message, but only if I blocked both of them afterward. It felt like a small action for something that demanded so much more, but it was all I could do from where I was. The confrontation. I sent him a direct message, blunt and unapologetic. I told him I knew what he had done, that it was unacceptable, and that I expected him to stay far away from my wife. His response was quick and full of apologies, claiming he hadn't meant to make her uncomfortable. I didn't believe him, but I didn't want to engage further. I blocked him and his wife as promised, hoping that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. Shortly after, the gym friend reached out to me through another platform. Her message was short but pointed. Not everyone in this story is innocent. You need to talk to your wife and get the full truth. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. What did she mean? What truth? I debated whether to bring it up with my wife immediately or wait until I was home and could have the conversation face to face. But the longer I waited, the more it ate at me. Couldn't ignore it. The hidden truths. When I finally asked her about it, she hesitated, her silence confirming my worst fears. What aren't you telling me? I pressed, my voice tight with anxiety. She broke down, admitting that there was more to her relationship with the gym friend than she had initially let on. It started with harmless flirtation, fueled by alcohol and curiosity. They had kissed once, then again on another night. At first, she downplayed it, calling it just something girls do. But as I pressed further, more details came out. The first time they kissed was at the friend's request, while her husband watched. The second time it was in a hot tub with the husband nearby. Both incidents, she admitted, were fueled by alcohol and impulsivity. She swore it was nothing more than curiosity, that she wasn't attracted to women in that way and didn't want a relationship with her friend. But the betrayal cut deep. You weren't going to tell me, were you? I asked, my voice shaking. I didn't think it mattered, she said quietly. I didn't want to hurt you. Her words felt hollow. Everything mattered now. Every kiss, every secret, every choice she made while I was away. I thought we had been making progress, but the reality was that I had only been seeing the parts of her she wanted me to see. The aftermath. That night, she called me in tears, saying she felt like she didn't deserve to live after hurting me so much. I spent hours talking her down, reassuring her that I didn't want her to feel that way, even as I grappled with my own pain. It was one of the hardest conversations of my life, trying to balance my hurt with my responsibility to keep her safe. As I sat in my dorm room after the call, I felt a crushing sense of despair. I had thought confessing my own sins would be the hardest part, but now I realized that rebuilding trust would be a far more difficult battle. The days following her confession were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. Training demanded focus and discipline, but my mind was elsewhere. I felt like a shell of myself, dragging through the days while reliving the revelations over and over in my head. Every detail she shared played on a loop, the kisses, the secrecy, the moments she hadn't planned to tell me about. The betrayal I had inflicted on her with my affair felt like it had come full circle. For the first time, I fully understood the pain I had caused her. But this wasn't just karma. It wasn't as simple as now I know how it feels. This was different. It wasn't just the actions themselves that hurt. It was the deception, the lies by omission, and the feeling that the foundation we'd been trying to rebuild had been built on sand. We tried to talk every evening after her admission, but the conversations felt like walking through a minefield. One wrong word could set off an explosion. She vacillated between anger at herself, anger at me for digging so deeply into her secrets, and guilt for how her choices had hurt me. I swung between frustration, heartbreak, and a nagging sense of inadequacy. How had we reached this point? And was there even a way out? A fractured connection. When I asked her why she hadn't told me about her actions sooner, her answer felt both painfully honest and deeply frustrating. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said. "I didn't think it mattered because it didn't mean anything. It was just curiosity. But it mattered to me." The intent behind her actions didn't erase the betrayal I felt. Worse, the fact that I had to pull the truth from her piece by piece made me question how much I could trust her moving forward. She insisted that her feelings for her gym friend weren't romantic, that it had all been a mistake fueled by alcohol and poor judgment. But as the days passed, more details came to light. She admitted to asking her friend to FaceTime her while having sex with her husband, a confession that left me speechless. Her reasoning? I wanted to see what it was like. Each revelation felt like another crack in the fragile framework of our marriage. Still, I couldn't ignore the moments when she broke down in tears, apologizing and begging me not to give up on her. She was struggling, grappling with the guilt of her actions, the shame of being caught, and the fear that she had pushed me too far. The distance hurts. Being hundreds of miles away made everything worse. I wanted to be there for her, to look her in the eyes and have these conversations face to face. But instead, we were reduced to phone calls and text messages, trying to navigate this emotional battlefield from opposite sides of the country. The distance also amplified my feelings of helplessness. She admitted to having suicidal thoughts after our conversations, and there was nothing I could do but talk to her until she felt safe again. Every day I worried about her, checking my phone constantly in case she needed me. It was a vicious cycle. She was hurting, I was hurting, and neither of us could do much to comfort the other. At the same time, the guilt from my own actions never left me. I knew I had put her in a dark place with my affair, and I hated that I had contributed to the pain she was feeling now. But I also couldn't ignore my own hurt. I felt like I was drowning, caught between the weight of my mistakes and the fresh wounds she had inflicted, trying to reconnect. Despite everything, there were moments when we tried to find some semblance of normalcy. She would send me pictures of the kids, updates about her day, or little jokes to lighten the mood. Those moments gave me hope, even if they were fleeting. They reminded me why I was fighting for this marriage, because I loved her, because I wanted our kids to grow up in a home where their parents didn't give up on each other, because deep down, I believed we could come out of this stronger. But rebuilding trust felt impossible. I didn't know how to believe her when she said there was nothing else I didn't know. Every time we talked, I questioned her words, wondering if there was another secret waiting to be uncovered. She could sense my doubt, and it frustrated her. "I've told you everything," she would say, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "What more do you want from me?" I didn't have an answer, seeking clarity. One night, after a particularly emotional conversation, I decided I needed clarity. I called a close friend, someone who had been through their own struggles in marriage, and told them everything. They listened patiently, letting me pour out my frustration, guilt, and heartbreak. "You both made mistakes," they said finally. "Big ones. But the question isn't about what happened, it's about whether you can move forward. Do you want to?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I want to, but I don't know if I can." "That's fair," they said. "But you need to decide. Sitting in limbo isn't going to help either of you. If you want to make this work, you have to commit to it fully. And if you can't, then you owe it to both of you to be honest." Their words stuck with me. I didn't have an immediate answer, but they gave me a framework for how to approach the days ahead. It wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about deciding if we could rebuild a foundation that had been broken so many times. The next step. In the weeks that followed, I tried to focus on small steps. I made a point to check in with her every day, even if it was just to ask how she was doing. I tried to listen without judgment, to remind her that I cared, even when I didn't have the answers. At the same time, I began to reflect on my own actions, not just the affair, but the years of neglect, selfishness, and avoidance that had contributed to the state of our marriage. I realized that if I wanted to expect honesty and vulnerability from her, I had to offer the same in return. But trust doesn't come back easily. It's built slowly over time with consistent effort and accountability. And as much as I wanted to believe we could get there, part of me still wondered if it was already too late. The days turned into weeks, and while the dust from the immediate fallout began to settle, the weight of our broken trust lingered. I wanted to believe that we could rebuild what had been shattered, but the path forward felt impossibly fragile. Every conversation with her felt like walking on eggshells, as though one wrong word could send us spiraling back into anger and hurt. Her confessions, though painful, felt incomplete. I questioned everything. I wondered if there were still secrets she wasn't telling me, if she was withholding parts of the truth to avoid further conflict. And every time I asked for reassurance, her frustration grew. "What do you want from me?" she asked one evening during a tense phone call. "I've told you everything. I've admitted my mistakes. What else can I do?" I didn't have a clear answer for her. I wanted to believe her, but trust doesn't come back overnight. The wounds from both sides ran deep, and the space between us, both emotional and physical, made it even harder to bridge the gap. Small steps forward. Despite the tension, there were moments of hope. She would send me pictures of the kids laughing, little updates about their day-to-day lives. She told me about her classes, her workouts, and how she was trying to focus on being a better version of herself. These glimpses of normalcy reminded me of the woman I fell in love with, the person I wanted to fight for. I tried to reciprocate, sharing details about my training and how I was working on becoming a better person, too. The military had taught me a lot about discipline, integrity, and accountability, qualities I knew I hadn't always shown in our marriage. I wanted her to see that I was changing, that I was committed to being someone she could rely on. But even as we made these small efforts, the shadow of the past loomed over us. She admitted that she still struggled with suicidal thoughts, and the guilt of knowing I had contributed to her pain weighed heavily on me. I spent many nights lying awake in my dorm, worrying about her, wishing I could be there to help her through the darkness, confronting the pain. One evening, during a rare moment of vulnerability, she opened up about how deeply everything had affected her. "I don't even know who I am anymore," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I've spent so much time trying to be everything for everyone, trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mom, and I feel like I've completely lost myself." Her words hit me hard. I had been so focused on my own guilt and pain that I hadn't fully considered how much she was carrying. She wasn't just dealing with the fallout of my affair or her own actions. She was grappling with years of unresolved hurt, self-doubt, and the pressure of being everything to everyone. "I don't want you to feel like that," I told her. "You've been carrying so much, and I haven't made it any easier. But I want to help. I want to be better for you, for the kids, for us." She didn't respond right away, but the silence felt less heavy than before. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a small step toward understanding. Reevaluating priorities. As I continued with my training, I began to reevaluate my priorities. The time apart from my family gave me a new perspective on what truly mattered. For years, I had placed my career and personal ambitions above everything else, justifying it as providing for the family. But what good was financial stability if it came at the cost of emotional connection? What good was success if I wasn't present for the people who mattered most? I realized that if we were going to rebuild our marriage, I couldn't keep living in a way that put my family second. That meant being more intentional with my time, prioritizing open communication, and addressing the issues we had both avoided for so long. A glimmer of hope. One night, after weeks of strained conversations, she called me unexpectedly. Her tone was softer than it had been in weeks, and for the first time, I heard a hint of the warmth I thought we had lost. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, "about everything, and I don't want to keep living in the past. I know we've both made mistakes, but if we're going to make this work, we need to focus on moving forward." Her words gave me a sense of hope I hadn't felt in months. "I want that too," I said, But I know it's not going to be easy. It won't be, she agreed. But I think it's worth it. For us, for the kids. We've already been through so much. If we can survive this, I think we can survive anything. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same page. It wasn't a solution, but it was a starting point. A shared commitment to try, even if neither of us knew exactly how to move forward. Rebuilding trust. Rebuilding trust became our focus, though it was far from a smooth process. We set boundaries to prevent future missteps. No more drinking in situations that could lead to poor decisions, complete transparency about our friendships, and regular check-ins to discuss how we were feeling. I also encouraged her to seek therapy, not just for the pain caused by our marriage, but for the deeper issues she had been carrying for years. She was hesitant at first, but eventually, she agreed. Knowing she was taking steps to work on herself gave me hope that we could both grow individually and as a couple. At the same time, I began to focus on my own growth. I attended workshops on communication and emotional intelligence offered through my training program, and I started journaling to process my emotions. The more I worked on myself, the more I realized how much I had neglected my role in our marriage over the years. The path ahead. We weren't fixed, not by a long shot, but for the first time we were both putting in the effort to rebuild. The cracks in our foundation were still visible, but we were slowly filling them with honesty, accountability, and a renewed commitment to each other. It wasn't easy, and there were days when it felt like we were taking 2 steps back for every step forward. But we kept trying. As I prepared for the final weeks of my training, I felt a cautious sense of optimism. I knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but I also knew that if we both stayed committed, there was a chance we could create something stronger than what we had before. The fragile sense of hope we had started to build felt like a flickering flame. It wasn't enough to light our path forward, but it was enough to keep us trying. As my training continued, I held on to the belief that we could make it through this, though doubt lingered in the back of my mind. Could we rebuild trust after so much had been broken? Our phone calls grew more frequent, though they were still a mix of cautious optimism and underlying tension. She would share updates about the kids and her day, and I'd tell her about my progress in training. But every conversation carried an unspoken weight, a reminder of the betrayals we were both trying to move past. I wanted to believe her when she said there were no more secrets, that she had told me everything. But the doubt was always there, gnawing at the edges of my mind. And I knew she felt the same about me. Trust wasn't something we could just declare. It had to be rebuilt piece by piece, and that would take time. A shared effort. One evening, during a rare quiet moment, she surprised me by saying, "I've been thinking about seeing a therapist." I nearly dropped the phone. For years, she had resisted the idea of therapy, dismissing it as unnecessary or something that wouldn't work for her. But now, she was open to it, and I felt a surge of relief. "I think that's a great idea," I told her. "It could really help you process everything. I need to figure out who I am again," she admitted. "I've been carrying so much guilt and pain, and I don't want it to keep weighing me down." Her words gave me hope, not just for her, but for us. If she was willing to work on herself, it meant she was serious about rebuilding. And it inspired me to keep working on myself, too. The kids' perspective. While we were both focused on repairing our marriage, we couldn't ignore the impact this was having on our kids. They were too young to understand the full scope of what was happening, but they weren't oblivious to the tension between us. When I spoke to them on the phone, they would ask when I was coming home, and it broke my heart every time. "I miss you, Daddy," my youngest said during one call, her voice small and sad. "I miss you too, sweetheart," I replied, my throat tightening. "I'll be home soon, I promise." My wife told me that the kids had started asking questions. Why I was gone so much, why Mommy seemed sad sometimes. She did her best to shield them from the worst of it, but I could tell it was taking a toll on her. Parenting alone while juggling school and everything else wasn't easy, and I felt guilty for not being there to help. "I just want them to have stability," she said one night. "I don't want them to feel like everything is falling apart." "Me neither," I said. "That's why I'm doing this. For them. For us. I want them to see that we didn't give up, that we fought to keep our family together." Her silence on the other end of the line felt heavy, But after a moment, she said, "I hope they'll understand someday." Facing the scars. One of the hardest parts of rebuilding was addressing the lingering wounds we had both inflicted on each other. It wasn't just about what had happened recently. It was about years of unresolved issues, from her near infidelity early in our marriage to my emotional distance and the choices I had made during our separation. During one particularly emotional conversation, she brought up my affair again. "I know you said it was a one-time thing," she began hesitantly. "But it's hard not to wonder, was there more? Were there other times you didn't tell me about?" "No," I said firmly. "There was no one else. I know I messed up, and I've been honest with you about that. I didn't want to hurt you more than I already have, but I knew I had to tell you the truth." She sighed, and I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "I want to believe you. I really do. But it's hard." "I understand," I said softly. "And I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that you can trust me again." But proving that wasn't easy. Every time I tried to reassure her, I could feel the wall between us. A barrier built from years of distrust and pain. And I knew I wasn't the only one who felt it. As much as I struggled to trust her after her own confessions, I realized I couldn't expect her to trust me fully until I gave her a reason to. Turning point. As the weeks went on, there was a subtle shift in our conversations. We started talking less about the past and more about the future, what life would look like after I finished training, how we could rebuild our relationship, and what steps we needed to take to move forward. "I think we need to start fresh," she said one night. "Not forget everything, but start over. Build something new instead of trying to fix something that's broken." "What does that look like to you?" I asked. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I think it starts with both of us letting go of the past. Not ignoring it, but not letting it define us either." Her words stuck with me. For so long, I had been holding onto the guilt of my actions and the pain of hers, letting it dictate how I saw myself and our marriage. But maybe she was right. Maybe the only way forward was to let go. The path ahead. As I approached the final weeks of training, I felt a cautious sense of optimism. We weren't healed and we weren't perfect, but we were trying. She was taking steps to work on herself, and I was doing the same. We had set boundaries to protect our marriage and agreed to be more intentional about how we communicated and supported each other. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were walking it together. And while the scars of our past would always be there, I started to believe that they didn't have to define our future. The day I returned home from training was supposed to feel triumphant, like a soldier coming back to his family after a long battle. But instead, it was fraught with nerves and uncertainty. I wasn't coming home to a victory. I was coming home to a battlefield we were still navigating. When I walked through the door, the kids ran to me, their little arms wrapping around my legs as they shouted, "Daddy!" Their joy was pure, untainted by the complexities of the past year. I knelt down to hug them, burying my face in their hair, and for a brief moment, I felt like everything might be okay. But when I looked up, I saw her standing in the doorway to the kitchen, her expression hesitant. She offered me a small smile, but there was something guarded in her eyes. Couldn't blame her. This wasn't the homecoming of a husband and wife reconnecting. It was the cautious meeting of two people still trying to figure out how to rebuild what had been lost. The awkward first days. The first few days back were a mix of tentative warmth and awkward distance. We tried to fall back into the rhythm of family life, sharing meals, helping the kids with homework, and talking about mundane things like grocery lists and school schedules. But beneath the surface, the tension was palpable. She seemed torn between wanting to let her guard down and keeping her walls firmly in place. I felt it every time I reached out to hold her hand and she hesitated, every time I asked how she was feeling and she gave me a non-committal answer. One evening, as we sat on the couch after putting the kids to bed, I finally broke the silence. "This feels different," I said carefully, "like we're both tiptoeing around each other." She sighed, staring down at her hands. "Because we are. I want to be close to you, but it's hard. I'm still processing everything." "I get that," I said softly, "and I know I've hurt you, but I'm here now, and I want to do whatever it takes to make this work." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of vulnerability. "I want to believe that," she said. "But I don't know how to let myself trust you again." Her honesty cut deep, but I appreciated it. Rebuilding trust wasn't something I could force, it was something I had to earn one step at a time. Confronting the past. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, we sat down to have the conversation we had both been avoiding. I brought up her gym friend and the incidents she had confessed to while I was away. "Can we talk about what happened?" I asked cautiously. She tensed, her body language immediately defensive. "What's left to talk about? I told you everything." "I know," I said, "but it's still there. It's hard to move forward when it feels like we're both carrying this weight." She was silent for a long time, staring at the floor. "I hate what I did," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hate that I kept it from you, that I betrayed your trust. But every time we talk about it, it feels like I'm being dragged back into that shame." "I'm not trying to drag you back," I said gently. "I just want to understand. Why didn't you tell me? Why did it happen in the first place?" She looked at me then, tears welling in her eyes. "Because I was lonely. Because I felt like you didn't care about me anymore. And because I was trying to escape my own feelings of inadequacy. It wasn't about you. It was about me and how broken I felt." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For years, I had been so focused on my own guilt and failings that I hadn't fully considered how much pain she had been carrying. It didn't excuse her actions, but it helped me see them in a different light. "I'm sorry you felt that way," I said. "I wish I had been there for you." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "And I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth. I didn't want to lose you." Taking small steps. After that conversation, something shifted between us. It wasn't a dramatic change. There was no grand moment of reconciliation, but it felt like we were finally starting to meet each other halfway. We both knew we had a long way to go, but we were willing to take small steps toward rebuilding. One of those steps was creating a list of boundaries and commitments for our relationship. We agreed to prioritize open communication, to check in with each other regularly, and to avoid situations that could lead to misunderstandings or temptation. It felt almost clinical, but it was a necessary foundation for trust. We also started spending more intentional time together. It wasn't easy. Years of emotional distance don't disappear overnight, but we made an effort. We cooked dinner together, watched movies after the kids went to bed, and even started going on walks in the evening. Those moments, though small, felt like tiny stitches mending the fabric of our relationship. Rebuilding trust with the kids. One of the hardest parts of coming home was realizing how much my absence had affected the kids. They were thrilled to have me back, but I could tell they had grown used to me being gone. They turned to their mom for everything. Help with homework, comfort when they were upset, even questions about day-to-day things I used to handle. It was humbling, but it also motivated me to step up as a father. I made a point to spend one-on-one time with each of them, asking about their interests, helping with school projects, and just being present. Slowly, I began to feel like I was earning back their trust, too. The path ahead. By the end of my first month back, we were beginning to find a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, arguments that flared up unexpectedly, and days when the weight of the past felt too heavy to bear. But we were trying. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were moving in the right direction. The road ahead was still uncertain, but we were walking it together, one step at a time. And that, I realized, was enough for now. The rhythm of our lives began to take shape again. It wasn't the same as it had been before. There were still cracks in the foundation, fractures in the trust we were working to rebuild. But at least we were moving forward, however cautiously. The fragile peace between us felt like a small victory in itself. Even so, there were moments when the tension boiled over. One evening, while the kids were asleep, I noticed she seemed distant, scrolling through her phone with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She looked up, startled, as if I'd caught her in the middle of something. "Yeah, just thinking." I hesitated before asking, "About what?" Her sigh was heavy, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. About us, she admitted. About whether we'll ever feel normal again. The honesty in her words hit me hard. I think about that too, I confessed. But maybe normal isn't what we should aim for. Maybe it's about creating something new, something better. She nodded slowly, but her eyes were filled with doubt. I want to believe that, she said. I really do, but it's hard to let go of everything. I know, I said quietly, but I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out together. Focusing on growth. The next few weeks were marked by small but meaningful efforts to focus on personal growth, both hers and mine. She started attending therapy regularly, and though she didn't share every detail, she told me it was helping her process the layers of guilt, shame, and self-doubt she'd been carrying for years. I didn't realize how much I'd been bottling up, she told me one night after a session. It's like, I've been holding onto this version of myself that doesn't exist anymore. And I'm finally starting to let her go. Hearing her say that gave me hope. It wasn't just about healing our marriage. It was about her finding herself again. And in turn, it inspired me to keep working on my own growth. I stayed consistent with the lessons I'd learned during training. Accountability, integrity, and emotional resilience. They weren't just words anymore. They were principles I was determined to live by. Rekindling connection. One of the most challenging aspects of rebuilding was finding ways to reconnect emotionally and physically. The intimacy we once had felt distant, overshadowed by everything we'd been through. But we both knew that rebuilding our connection was essential if we wanted to move forward. We started small, holding hands during our evening walks, sitting closer on the couch while watching TV, and even hugging more often. At first, it felt a little forced, like we were trying to mimic a version of ourselves we'd lost. But over time, those small gestures began to feel more natural. One night, as we were cleaning up after dinner, I wrapped my arms around her from behind. She tensed at first, but then she relaxed, leaning into me. I've missed this, I said softly. Me too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a grand moment, but it was a step, a reminder that there was still something worth fighting for between us. The kids as our anchor. Amidst the chaos of rebuilding our relationship, the kids became an anchor that kept us grounded. Their joy and innocence were a constant reminder of why we were doing this, why we were putting in the work to salvage what we had. We made a point to spend more time together as a family, from game nights to weekend outings. The laughter of our children felt like a balm, soothing the wounds we'd inflicted on each other. It reminded us that, despite everything, we were still a team. One afternoon, while playing outside with the kids, she pulled me aside and said, "Thank you for being here. For them. For me." I could see the sincerity in her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were truly on the same page. "I'll always be here," I told her. "No matter what." Addressing the doubts. As we worked to rebuild, doubts still lingered, for both of us. I couldn't shake the fear that she might still be hiding something, and I knew she felt the same about me. One evening, I decided to address it head-on. "I know we've both made mistakes," I said as we sat on the couch after the kids were asleep. "And I know it's hard to trust each other completely right now. But I don't want us to keep living with this doubt." She looked at me, her expression a mix of hesitation and hope. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want us to be fully transparent," I explained. "No more secrets, no more hiding. If we're going to rebuild trust, we need to commit to complete honesty, even when it's hard." She nodded, though I could see the fear in her eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if we can't do it? What if the truth just makes things worse?" "It won't," I said firmly, "because the truth is the only way forward. Even if it's painful, it's better than living with doubt." That night, we made a pact, to be fully honest with each other moving forward. It wasn't an easy promise to make, but it felt like a turning point, a commitment to rebuilding on a foundation of truth. The path to forgiveness. As the days turned into weeks, we began to feel the weight of our shared efforts. There were still moments of tension, but there were also moments of warmth and connection that reminded us why we were fighting for this. Forgiveness wasn't immediate, it was something we worked toward, one small step at a time. One evening, As we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "I think I'm starting to forgive you." Her words caught me off guard, but they filled me with a sense of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means more than I can say." "I'm not there yet," she added quickly, "but I'm getting closer." "So am I admitted, "to forgiving you." We sat in silence for a while after that, the unspoken understanding between us stronger than any words could have been. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Progress felt like climbing a mountain, slow, grueling, and with moments where the ground beneath us felt unsteady. For every step forward, there were moments of doubt that threatened to send us tumbling back. But we were still climbing together, and that was what mattered most. Our commitment to honesty had brought both relief and discomfort. The unspoken doubts that had lingered between us for so long were now out in the open. And while that honesty was necessary, it didn't make the truths any easier to face. There were still moments when old wounds bled, but we were learning how to address them without letting them fester. Unpacking the pain. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, she sat down across from me at the dining table, her expression serious. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she began, her voice steady but soft. "About why I did the things I did." I set my phone down, giving her my full attention.
"I'm listening."
She took a deep breath, as if steadying herself for what she was about to say. "I think a part of me was acting out because I felt like I'd lost control. Of myself, of us, of everything. When you left for training, it felt like I was alone again. Like I was carrying all the weight of our family on my shoulders." I nodded, staying silent to let her continue. "And then I started going to the gym, and I felt noticed, valued. I wasn't just a mom or a wife. I was someone people wanted to talk to, someone people wanted to be around. I think I got carried away in that feeling, and it made me do things I shouldn't have." Her words stung, but they also made sense. For the first time, I saw the vulnerability behind her actions. "Thank you for telling me that," I said. "I know that wasn't easy." She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with tears. "I hate what I did, Marcus. I hate that I hurt you. And I know it's going to take time to fix what I broke. But I want you to know that I'm all in. I'm not giving up on us." Her words were like a balm to the wounds I'd been carrying. "I'm all in too," I said, my voice firm. "We'll figure this out together." Rebuilding intimacy. As the emotional walls between us began to come down, we started focusing on rebuilding intimacy. Not just physically, but emotionally. For years, our communication had been surface level, often overshadowed by the demands of parenthood and the stress of daily life. Now, we were learning how to truly connect again. We started doing little things that had once been second nature. Holding hands, kissing each other goodnight, and leaving small notes for one another. At first, it felt awkward, like trying to remember steps to a dance we hadn't performed in years. But over time, it began to feel natural again. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, I reached for her hand. She glanced at me, surprised, but didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned her head against my shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of closeness that had been missing for years. The kids as a mirror. The kids, in their innocence, became a mirror for our progress. They didn't understand the complexities of our struggles, but they could sense the shift in our relationship. They saw us laughing together more often, spending time as a family, and being more present with one another. One day, as we played a board game in the living room, our youngest looked up at us and said, "You and Mommy are happy again." Her simple observation brought tears to my wife's eyes. She reached out and hugged our daughter tightly, whispering, "We're working on it." Their words reminded me of why we were doing all of this. It wasn't just for us, it was for them. They deserved a home filled with love, stability, and parents who were willing to fight for each other. Facing challenges. As much progress as we'd made, there were still moments that tested us. Old insecurities had a way of resurfacing, triggered by seemingly small things. A phone notification, a passing comment, or a memory we hadn't fully dealt with. One night, as I was scrolling through my phone, she asked, "Who are you texting?" "No one," I said, showing her the screen. Just looking at work emails. She nodded, but I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I don't mean to be paranoid. It's just hard sometimes. I get it, I said, placing my phone down. And I don't blame you. But I'm here, and I'm not hiding anything. You can ask me anything, anytime. Moments like that reminded me that rebuilding trust wasn't a linear process. It required patience, understanding, and a willingness to reassure each other, even when it felt repetitive. A new foundation. By the end of the month, we both began to feel the weight of our efforts paying off. It wasn't perfect, we still had work to do. But the foundation we were building felt stronger than before. We had learned to communicate more openly, to face our pain instead of avoiding it, and to prioritize each other in a way we hadn't in years. One night, as we sat on the porch after putting the kids to bed, she reached for my hand. Thank you, she said softly, for not giving up on me, on us. I squeezed her hand gently. We've both made mistakes, but I think we're stronger for it. And I'm not going anywhere. For the first time, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something to look forward to, something we could build together one day at a time. As we continued rebuilding our relationship, life didn't wait for us to catch up. The kids needed our attention, work demanded our energy, and the weight of everyday responsibilities loomed large. But through it all, something felt different. We weren't navigating these challenges alone anymore. We were facing them together. The foundation we were building was still fragile, but it was holding. Every small moment of connection, every honest conversation, every choice to trust each other felt like another brick in the walls of the life we were trying to reconstruct. But life, as always, had a way of testing our progress. A job offer and a choice. One evening, while we were putting the kids to bed, I noticed she seemed distracted. After the house had quieted down, I asked her what was on her mind. I got a job offer, she said, her voice hesitant. That's great, I said, genuinely happy for her. What kind of job? It's an event coordinator position for a local company, she explained. It's part-time, but it's good money, and it's flexible enough that I can still focus on school and the kids. That sounds like a perfect fit, I said. Why do you seem unsure about it? She sighed, sitting down on the couch. Because it's a big change. I've been so focused on the kids and school that I'm nervous about adding something else to my plate. And I don't want to put more strain on us. Her concern was valid. We had just started finding our rhythm again, and adding a new dynamic could complicate things. But I also knew how important it was for her to feel like she had her own identity and independence. You should do it, I said after a moment. If it feels right for you, we'll make it work. I'll support you. Her expression softened, and for the first time that evening, I saw a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. Thank you, she said. I really want to try. Balancing the new normal. Her new job brought a sense of purpose and excitement to her life, but it also introduced new challenges. Between her work, school, and the kids, our time together became more limited. We had to be intentional about carving out moments for each other. Date nights, even if they were just takeout and a movie after the kids went to bed, or quick morning coffee chats before the chaos of the day began. At first, the adjustment was rocky. I sometimes felt like I was taking a back seat to everything else in her life, and she admitted that she felt stretched thin. But instead of letting the strain pull us apart, we leaned into the communication habits we had been working on. I don't want you to feel like I'm neglecting us, she told me one night. This job is important to me, but so are you. I know, I said, and I'm proud of you for taking this step. We'll figure it out together. Revisiting old wounds. As life moved forward, there were moments when the past still crept back in, threatening to disrupt the progress we'd made. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, I noticed she seemed distant. What's on your mind? I asked. She hesitated, her hands pausing over the sink. I was thinking about everything. The mistakes I made. The mistakes you made. Sometimes it feels like it's all still there, just beneath the surface. It is still there, I said honestly. But it doesn't have to control us anymore. We've come so far, and we're not the same people we were then. She nodded, but I could tell the weight of it still lingered. Do you ever wonder if we'll fully move past it? I think it's less about moving past it and more about moving with it, I said. The pain, the mistakes, they're part of our story now. But they don't define the whole story. We do. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw a spark of hope. You're right, she said softly. We're writing something new, finding strength together. One of the most unexpected outcomes of everything we had been through was the strength we found in each other. Where there had once been resentment and avoidance, there was now a partnership built on vulnerability and mutual support. When I struggled with balancing my own responsibilities, work, fatherhood, and being an attentive husband, she was there to encourage me. And when she felt overwhelmed by her new job or doubts about her ability to juggle everything, I was there to remind her of how capable she was. We became each other's anchor in a way we hadn't been for years. It wasn't perfect. There were still arguments, moments of frustration, and times when old habits tried to resurface. But we had learned how to navigate those moments with more patience and understanding. A family reconnected. The kids began to notice the changes in our relationship, too. They saw us laughing more, spending time together as a family, and showing affection toward each other in ways we hadn't before. Their joy became our joy, and their love reminded us of why we had chosen to fight for our marriage in the first place. One weekend, we took them to the park for a picnic. As we watched them play, she turned to me and said, "Thank you for not giving up on us." I smiled, reaching for her hand. "Thank you for fighting with me." Looking ahead. As we sat there, watching the sunset over the horizon, I realized that we had reached a turning point. The road ahead wouldn't be without challenges, but we were finally in a place where we could face them together, as a team. Our relationship wasn't just surviving anymore. It was beginning to thrive. For the first time in years, I felt a deep sense of hope. The wounds of the past were still there, but they were healing. And as we looked toward the future, I knew that we were stronger for everything we had endured. As the months went on, our fragile foundation began to feel more solid. The cracks were still visible, but instead of trying to patch over them, we embraced them as part of our story, a reminder of how far we'd come. For the first time in a long time, we weren't just surviving. We were beginning to truly live as a couple again. The changes in both of us were subtle but significant. She was more confident, not just in her role as a mother and professional, but in her sense of self. And I had learned how to be present, not just physically, but emotionally. We weren't perfect, but we were better, more intentional, more aware of each other's needs, celebrating milestones. Her new job came with its challenges, but it also gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Watching her thrive was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. I saw her come home from work tired but fulfilled, her eyes lighting up as she told me about the events she was planning or the progress she was making. One evening, after the kids were in bed, she came into the living room holding a small bottle of champagne. "What's this for?" I asked, surprised. "I got a promotion," she said, her smile wide but a little hesitant, as if she wasn't sure how I'd react. "It's not a big one, but it's something." "Are you kidding? That's amazing," I said, pulling her into a hug. "You've worked so hard for this. You deserve it." We toasted to her success that night, sitting on the floor of the living room with champagne glasses in hand. It was a small celebration, but it felt monumental. For so long, we had been focused on repairing the damage in our marriage that we hadn't taken the time to celebrate the good. That night, we allowed ourselves to be happy, to acknowledge that despite everything, we were moving forward, facing new challenges. Of course, progress wasn't linear. There were still moments when the past reared its head, forcing us to confront the lingering pain we hadn't fully resolved. One afternoon, as we were sorting through some old boxes in the garage, she came across a stack of photos from the time I'd spent working out of state, the summer she had filed for divorce. Her face fell as she flipped through the images, her fingers pausing on one of me smiling with a group of coworkers. "I hated that summer," she said quietly, more to herself than to me. I sat down beside her, unsure of what to say. It was a hard time for both of us, I finally said. I made a lot of mistakes back then. So did I, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I thought I wanted to end things. I thought it would be easier. But looking back, I don't know what I would have done if we'd actually gone through with it. I reached out and took her hand. We didn't, and we're here now. That's what matters. She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. Sometimes I still feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, like we're one argument away from falling apart again. I know that feeling, I admitted, but I don't think we're the same people we were back then. We've worked too hard to let this slip away. Her grip on my hand tightened, and for a moment, we just sat there, surrounded by the remnants of our past, holding on to the present.
Rekindling romance.
One of the most rewarding parts of our journey was rediscovering the romance that had once defined the early years of our marriage. It wasn't about grand gestures or expensive dates. It was about finding joy in the little things. We started making time for each other in ways that felt meaningful. Friday nights became our designated date nights, even if they were just spent cooking dinner together and talking about our week. We planned weekend getaways, leaving the kids with family so we could focus on reconnecting without distractions. On one of those weekends, we rented a small cabin by a lake. It was quiet and secluded, surrounded by trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. As we sat by the fire that night, wrapped in blankets, she leaned against me and said, "I forgot how much I missed this, just being with you." "Me too," I said, kissing the top of her head. "It feels good to have this again." It wasn't just the physical intimacy we were rebuilding. It was the emotional closeness, the sense of being truly seen and valued by each other. Reflecting on the journey. As we grew closer, we started talking more openly about everything we had been through. Not to dwell on the past, but to understand it. Those conversations weren't always easy, but they were necessary. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "Do you ever regret staying? After everything that happened?" Her question caught me off guard, but I didn't hesitate in my answer. "No," I said firmly. "Not for a second. Staying was hard, but walking away would have been harder. I love you, and I love our family. That's worth fighting for." She smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I feel the same way. Even when it was at its worst, I couldn't imagine giving up on us." For the first time, I felt like we had reached a place of mutual understanding, a place where the pain of the past didn't overshadow the hope of the future. Looking toward the future. By the time we reached our anniversary, it felt like we were stepping into a new chapter of our lives. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined us. Instead, they served as reminders of our resilience, of the strength we had found in each other. On the night of our anniversary, as we sat across from each other at a quiet restaurant, she raised her glass and said, "Here's to us, to everything we've been through, and everything that's still ahead." "To us?" I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. In that moment, I realized that while our journey had been far from perfect, it had been worth every painful step. We weren't just rebuilding a marriage, we were creating something entirely new. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt bright. Our 10th anniversary came and went quietly, but it marked a milestone that neither of us had taken for granted. The fact that we had reached this point, after all the mistakes, the pain, and the uncertainty, was a testament to our commitment to each other and the family we had worked so hard to hold together. It didn't feel like a reset. It felt like a new beginning, one that we had both chosen, with open eyes and open hearts. Life hadn't magically become perfect, but the difference now was that we faced challenges as a team. We were learning how to approach life's hurdles with patience, humility, and, most importantly, communication. There were no more unspoken resentments, no more secrets lurking in the shadows. Everything was out in the open, and while that vulnerability was scary at times, it was also liberating. Celebrating progress. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, we found ourselves sitting at the kitchen table, looking through old photo albums. The images of our younger selves felt like snapshots of a different world, a world where we were both blissfully unaware of how difficult marriage could be. "Look at us," she said, pointing to a picture from our honeymoon. We were smiling broadly, arms around each other as we stood on a beach. We had no idea what was coming. None at all, I agreed, laughing softly. But we made it. She turned to me, her expression thoughtful. Do you ever wish we could go back to that time? Before everything. I shook my head.
No.
As hard as it's been, I don't think I'd trade what we have now. Back then, we didn't really know each other. Not the way we do now. She smiled, her eyes glistening. I guess you're right. We've earned this. We sat there for a while, flipping through the pages and sharing memories. It was a quiet moment, but it felt significant. It was a reminder of how far we had come and how much we had grown. A stronger foundation. Over the following months, we continued to prioritize the habits we had worked so hard to build. We made time for each other, not out of obligation, but because we genuinely enjoyed being together. We supported each other's goals, celebrated each other's successes, and leaned on each other during tough times. Her job continued to bring her fulfillment, and I found myself thriving in my own work as well. But the most important part was that we were doing it all while staying connected. The sense of teamwork that had been missing for so long was now at the core of our relationship. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, she turned to me and said, "I think this is the happiest I've ever been." Her words took me by surprise, but they filled me with a deep sense of pride and gratitude. "Me too," I said, reaching for her hand. "And it's because we fought for this." Teaching the next generation. Our journey wasn't just about rebuilding our marriage. It was also about showing our kids what love and commitment looked like. We wanted them to see that relationships weren't always easy, but that they were worth fighting for. We wanted to teach them the value of honesty, forgiveness, and resilience. One day, as I was helping my oldest with a school project, he asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. "Dad, how do you and Mom stay happy together?" I paused, caught off guard by the simplicity of his question. "Well," I said after a moment, "we work at it. We talk to each other, we listen, and we try to be honest, even when it's hard. And we never give up on each other." He nodded thoughtfully, as if filing the answer away for later. "I hope I can have that one day." "You will," I said, ruffling his hair. "Just remember, it's not about finding someone perfect. It's about choosing someone and working together to make it work. A lasting commitment." As the years went by, the struggles of the past began to fade into the background. They didn't disappear entirely, but they became less like wounds and more like scars. Visible reminders of what we had endured and overcome. We didn't try to erase them. Instead, we let them be part of our story. One evening, on the anniversary of the day we met, I surprised her with a handwritten letter. It wasn't grand or elaborate, but it was heartfelt. In it, I wrote about everything we had been through, the good, the bad, and the in-between, and how it had shaped us into the people we were today. She cried as she read it, then leaned over and kissed me. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "No," I said, pulling her close. "Thank you for staying, for fighting, for believing in us, the future we built." In the end, our marriage wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about erasing the mistakes or pretending they hadn't happened. It was about choosing each other every single day and building a life together that was stronger because of the challenges we had faced. As I sat on the porch one summer evening, watching the sun set over our yard while the kids chased each other through the grass, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. My wife sat beside me, her hand resting in mine, and I realized that this messy, imperfect, beautiful life was exactly what I had always wanted. We had been through the fire, and we had come out the other side. Not unscathed, but stronger. And as the years stretched out ahead of us, I knew that whatever challenges came our way, we would face them together. Because that's what love is. It's not about never falling. It's about always getting back up, hand in hand, and choosing to keep going. Together.